Today's episode of Socially Democratic is proudly brought to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising and campaigning. We work with non-profit, community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe. Dunn Street develops community engagement and organising strategies to win campaigns both big and small. We train engagement staff, volunteers and organisers in leadership and power building and help leaders craft their own public narrative that tells a story to unite people and move them to act together. And if you want to create change in 2023 in your community, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Are you passionate about extending access to justice? Maurice Blackburn has an exciting opportunity for a union participation manager to join the firm on a 12-month contract based in the Melbourne Central Business District, their office in the CBD otherwise. This is a high-profile opportunity where you can bring passion and enthusiasm to a role that will see you drive and promote the Maurice Blackburn ethos to help reach more clients in need. Find out more by going to mauriceblackburn.com.au/careers. So any of you field organisers out there that either organised on the 2022 state or federal and you're wandering around looking for a job, this is the job for you because you have the skill sets that Maurice Blackburn need. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energise the community both online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that drops every Friday, that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're having a chat to a good friend of ours from the Week on Wednesday podcast. Ben Davison is joining us to talk a bit about what's a bit of a check-in, really, with what's happening broadly in politics in Australia. So we're going to take a look at the Aston by-election, which is coming up on the 1st of April. We're going to talk a bit about the Voice to Parliament referendum campaign. We're going to talk a little bit about the New South Wales state election, which is coming up on the 25th of May, and then sign off with a bit of a chat about Daniel Andrews reaching 3,000 days in office. So lots to talk about with Ben. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you like the show, be sure to give us 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app. And when you're done listening to today's episode, leave us a review. And for all the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Thursday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and joining me on the show actually for the first time, which sounds weird given that we've done a bunch of stuff together on respective podcasts and live telecasts and whatnot. So better late than never. Ben Davison from the Week on Wednesday. Welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you, Stephen. It's an honour to be here. And yeah, it is the first time I've been on Socially Democratic, I think. Yeah.
It just dawned on me. We've had your better half on the show before, but obviously you haven't had you.
Well, that makes sense. You know, you're gonna get more people listen when you've got Van on the show. So apologies for the drop in ratings. But no, it's good to be here. Good to talk with you.
How's the podcast going?
Yeah, really good, really well. We're in Adelaide at the moment. Actually, we did the Week on Wednesday live from the Adelaide Fringe last night. We had a good turnout for that. The episode is up online wherever you get your podcasts, and we're going to be doing 3 more shows, March 1st, 8th, and 15th. There is scaled pricing, so there's a price point for every budget. And yeah, it's really great. We're in a yurt, it's air conditioned, the people are awesome, people get engaged, we hang around afterwards, Van signs books. You'll appreciate this. So afterwards, a couple of the regular listeners came up to Van and gave her a bog oak pen that they had made out of Irish bog that they had retrieved on a journey to their ancestral homeland because they knew that Van's mother had passed away, and they thought it would be a nice connection to the ancestral land of the Badhams. So, people are just so kind and awesome. So podcasts are
That's
going
beautiful.
great, and the audience is even nicer than the event itself.
I would be terrified doing a live podcast. That would, yeah. I mean, it's terrifying to do a podcast, period. But you have the luxury of knowing that actually this is pre-recorded, and if anything that goes wrong, you can fix. Right, the beauty of podcasting. But a live show, like mentally, how do you prepare yourself for that?
Well, there's a lot of anxiety and medication, and that helps. But it's really interesting, right? Because Van has this theatrical background and is well trained and has multiple degrees and taught theatre and theatre studies and all sorts of things. And of course, the peak of my theatrical life was getting a highly commended recommendation at the Ballarat South Street improvisation event because I told a joke about a low-flying duck when I was pretending to be a pilot who'd crashed his plane. So it is a different mental process for each of us. Van gets really comfortable with it, and I try and I probably over prepare. And funny thing is, I told people afterwards I was really nervous. That's the dog Germanicus. He made the trip to Adelaide with us.
Welcome.
Thank you. But no, it's nerve-wracking, really nerve-wracking. But you find too that like people generally are coming because they're interested in the podcast, they're interested in the topics, and they want to have a discussion about. They want to hear the discussion, and sometimes they want to talk about it afterwards too. So that's actually a really fun side benefit that I hadn't really thought about until we started doing a couple of live shows.
Can I ask you? We'll get to some of the contemporary topics of politics in a moment. But what was? I'm interested to get a sense from you about what was the motivating factor or the purpose that drove you and Van to want to create the Week on Wednesday podcast.
Really, it was started as a lockdown project. There's sort of no question about that. And it was really, we identified that there was just a gap in the market for progressive left-wing content that is unashamedly left-wing. Like we are democratic socialists and trade unionists, and we don't apologize for that. We don't pretend otherwise. And we constantly tell people on our podcast to join their union, like it's almost in every segment of our show. And we always take the workers' side. So, and when we were going through looking at the media that was out there and a lot of the podcasts, obviously this is an exception, Socially Democratic is an exception to this, but a lot of the podcasts are very right wing. Steve Bannon has a very successful podcast. A lot of the Fox identities have their own podcasts. And we went, we think there might be an audience for our kind of discussion. And it's all very low tech and lo-fi, and it's really just sitting around the table having a conversation. And it's given us an opportunity to really talk about issues and take the time out to talk about those issues and think about those issues. And the interaction from people has really shown us that there is a real audience, a real market that is keen to have these conversations and get a language for talking about these issues that is not prevalent or available in the mainstream media. And that's fundamentally the feedback we get regularly from people. And I mean, I imagine you get it too, right? Like these people who listen to these podcasts, they're interested in these topics, they want to understand more, but it's not readily available to them. The mainstream media talks in a language that's highly dominated by a kind of neoliberal ideological framework, and people don't have a language to engage. And more than anything, that's probably what we've found our podcast has given people, is that they no longer feel alone, and they're no longer unsure about how to talk about why it's important to have secure work, why increasing wages is a good thing, why state-run services and delivery can be a real positive in life. And a bit like what Elbow said at the press club yesterday, that the sense of security is more than just submarines and anti-missile technology. It's actually how you feel about your place in the world and in the community, and that tomorrow you're going to go to work, you're going to get paid properly, you're going to be treated decently, your kids are going to get a good education. And if something goes wrong, you're not going to go bankrupt, because you break your leg at work. Those are somewhat basic principles, but have been eroded over a long period of time. So we keep it really basic. We keep coming back to those basic principles.
It's one of the things I do love about your show is that it is creating a space for people to listen to a conversation that, as you said, is overtly left wing, and for people to reflect on the conversation, and then for the audience to take that into their own networks and say, well, actually, no, I heard Van and Ben during the week talking about this particular issue, and that made me think about that. And now I want to have a conversation with you in this workplace or in this environment, this community, and how we need to think on that and what we can do about it and what changes we can bring about it. Whereas the mainstream media have always framed up these topics in a way that they want to do it. And we might watch the news or watch Insiders or watch a TV program and go, oh, that's bullshit. I don't agree with that at all. And not having much, but you can't do much about it, right? You just get angry and yell at it. Whereas listening to your show, there's a sort of, that's interesting. And that's made me reframe the way I'm thinking about it. And now I can go do something about it. And then the connection as well between, say, your podcast and my podcast. There's a former student of, what do I use my words? Someone I went to school with is what I'm trying to say, who I have not spoken to for 20 years, reached out via one of the social media platforms and said, I found out about Socially Democratic through Ben and Van's podcast. And I'm doing, I'm an educator now, and I'm doing great work. I'm a delegate in my union, and I'm really locked in on this kind of stuff, and this is really, really important to me. And I just enjoy your show, and I enjoy Ben and Van's show, and it's given me focus about the work I want to do in my own community, particularly around unionism and empowering workers. And I just wanted to say hi. And I was like, man, well, this is great. Like, I'm so happy for you. I'm so pleased to see what you're doing, this kind of stuff. Just that connection, right? I just was like, oh, that's brilliant. And growing up you grew up in Ballarat, and I wonder what those experiences were like for you. I grew up in Warragul, which is an incredibly conservative town. And I just assumed when I was a kid, everyone in my school, even though I loved my time at the Morris Brothers, everyone in my school, I just thought they were all Tories, and then to find that, and we just didn't talk about politics. Well, I didn't talk about politics that much at school, just because I had the assumption that they were all Tories. But here I am discovering years later that there were Labor people from Labor families that were at my school, and they're going on to do great things.
I think it's one of the great things about your podcast and what we do as well, right, is that it actually gives people a greater sense of security about their own belief sets, because it gives them a language, it gives them a place where they can hear other people talk about these things in a way that is rational and sensible and is not hyperbolic. It actually is it is analytical. And we had somebody contact us not so long ago because we had talked about some industrial action that was underway. And the delegate actually contacted us saying that they had sat around on the picket line and listened to the episode, and then they had talked about not just their own picket line, but some of the other issues we talked about in the podcast as well. And that sort of thing is just so, I think, amazing, because like yourself, like I grew up in Ballarat in a time that was really conservative. People think about Ballarat now and they think it's a Labor town, and it is a Labor town now. But when I was a kid, we had a Liberal federal MP, we had Liberal state MPs, we had Liberal mayors. Growing up with two mums, we we were targeted for discrimination. Like, it was a really conservative place. And it's changed a lot. And it's a bit like yourself. I've had friends reach out going, I've listened to your podcast, and, now I'm a contributor, and, we're having these conversations about politics in our house and at work that we just didn't have before, because it wasn't encouraged. Like, if you were coming at things from the left in any way, shape or form, center left through to far left, it was not encouraged for you to have those conversations outside of very narrowly defined kind of academic institutions. And, for a lot of working class people, the idea of getting to uni was so that you could start to have that conversation. Well, I think we're kind of democratizing the language of politics by doing these sorts of things. And, we've done the live broadcasts of election night, and, when we beat Sky News on some of the coverage, that tells you that there is this huge group of people who want a different way of talking about politics and engaging with it, because we do engage with it. Like, obviously we get trolls or whatever and we block them, but if people engage in good faith, we engage back. Like, that's the democratic part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the bigger takeaways I think we had from the two live broadcasts we did last year for the federal election and the Victorian state election, was that there is such an appetite for wanting just left-wing media. We don't have that in this country. You've got that in the States, you've got MSNBC and all that kind of stuff. We don't have that here in Australia. And we're not MSNBC, obviously. And,
No.
there's a kind of, there's a self-reflection kind of... Hey?
If there's any investors who'd like to make that kind of investment, we'll find a way to put it to good use.
Oh, indeed. Absolutely. Like, I mean, there is a self-referential kind of, Australian piss take, pistarchy, as I call it, of what we're doing. But at the same time, there's a level of seriousness of trying to communicate to an audience about, hey, this is where you can get some good quality left-wing content, be it audio or visual or podcast or all the things in between. Can we talk about...
Yeah.
Sorry, go, Ben.
I was just going to say too, like, one of the things that, trying to do is build that network. And I think, there are good outlets around the place, and I think trade unions, and I think the Labor Party, and I think progressive organisations do need to get on board with platforming, Social Democratic, the Week on Wednesday, and there's... I know some unions are now doing their own little podcasts, and they are small, but they're targeted for groups of members, and good on them. We're all, this is not you've got me on your show, we've had you on ours. There's actually, when you talk about 30 to 40% of the population, there is enough market to go around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important for us to, that's why I want to get you on the show and get Van on the show, is to support the work that you guys are doing and vice versa. Because you're right, there are millions of our people out there. And I think it's just trying to get us to connect with them is one of the many challenges of what we do, but it's one of the most important ones, right? My theory change in my brain is there's, 100,000 Labor Party members. If 20% of them know about Social Democratic, I'd be happy with that,
Yeah.
David Feeney always makes a joke, how many people listen to the show, 6 or 7, and I want to point out to David, it's more than that. It's at least 10 or 12, but our challenge is to get more people to listen to the show, and then from that moment, then use it as an opportunity. Like, for example, in a moment where I'm going to plug people that they need to volunteer for the Aston campaign. This is an opportunity for people to hear some things and go, right, okay, here's how I make a difference, because this is an organising podcast, and in organising, it always requires an ask, a specific ask at some point. I don't do it too often, but there will be one today anyway. That's a good segue for Aston by-election, which is going to be on the 1st of April Fool's Day. And obviously the seat of Aston is in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. The campaign kicked off formally, I guess, this week with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese coming down to the electorate to do a press conference with Labor's candidate Mary Doyle. The Libs selected their candidate, Rashina Campbell, during the week. Before we sort of go into the ins and outs of the campaign itself, obviously this by-election was brought on by the resignation of Alan Tudge. Keen to get your reflections on the inquiry into Robodebt and Tudge's role in it, first of all?
Oh, look, Alan Tudge was a despicable minister of the Crown, and his departure from Parliament, you know, I always ask the question, why now, why not 10 years ago? Because frankly, he damaged the lives of tens of thousands of Australians, and is fairly unrepentant about that. I don't know, if people have seen any of his performance at the Robodebt Royal Commission. It was very much a lack of contrition, a lack of responsibility, blaming everyone but himself. At one point, I think he tried to throw Christian Porter under the bus. I mean, this gives you the insight into the culture of the current modern day Liberal Party. It is every man, and I use that term, that gendered term specifically, every man for himself operation. And Alan Tudge is the epitome of that. I mean, this is a man who, when he was education minister, was trying to lecture the hardworking teachers around this country about what morals and values they should be teaching students, after it had been publicly exposed that he was having an affair with a member of his staff. He was not a good minister, not a person who I would want involved in any way, shape or form. So I'm glad he's gone. I think it's interesting that he held on. He got himself re-elected. Obviously, it's always harder for an incumbent government to win a by-election. And I think he probably saw the polls that we were seeing that suggested Labor did have a good chance of winning government. And being a good party man in that sense, he held on, got himself just over the line, 10% swing against him, and is now positioned it so that there's a by-election rather than a vacancy, which I think the Liberals would have really struggled to hold on in the general election given the swing they had against them. So, yeah, glad he's gone. And look, Mary Doyle, great candidate, 10% swing in the general election, candidate again for the by-election. I mean, you'd know better than I would, Stephen, what the state patterns are showing us around that area. But I would think that this is not one of those by-elections where Labor's going to be running soft or running dead. I think we'd be running pretty hard.
Yeah, I think. Look, I don't know. Someone texted me during the week, said, "Stephen, what do you think your chances are in Aston?" And I actually haven't texted that person back, but I know they'll listen to the show. So here's the answer. I do wonder if there are elements of the party elite, I include myself in that think we're not going to win Aston. And I would say to them, and normally I can be a little bit cautious in my thoughts leading into an election campaign, and I've got form in that one when it came to the Victorian state election, but for good reason.
Can I just say on that, Stephen, that you during the election night broadcast, your sense of gloom and doom at the beginning of the broadcast was quickly dispelled by the bright sunny rays of victory, and it was lovely to see the change in your demeanour. It was good. It was good. It's good to be cautious. I get being cautious, but we don't have to be negative.
No, not at all. Well, I'm going to surprise folks here because this is on. Like,
Yep.
this is a genuine fight that we can win. And I know that Aston is a seat that we haven't won since 18 Diggity whatever. And historically, we've had cracks at it. This is not the first by-election we've had in Aston. We had a by-election in Aston in the 2000s or late 1990s. I can't remember. I should have actually did my research on this one, but I remember standing on the booth handing out for whoever the candidate was at the time. At the time we thought, oh, this is a long shot. I don't think this is a long shot in this instance. You're right. Huge swing to Labor's candidate, Mary Doyle, at the general. The state if we return the same result on April 1st as we did at the Victorian state election, we win the seat by around about, between 500 and 1,000 votes. Right now, Labor is riding high in the polls. The honeymoon for Albo and the Labor government continues, despite that article in the Sydney Morning Herald during the week. It continues to go. Daniel is very popular. The Liberal brand is in the toilet. Dutton is either unknown in Victoria or despised in Victoria. The Liberal Party itself are in turmoil, both nationally and at a state level. Like they spent half of their state caucus during the week, because Victorian sitting week this week, just fighting amongst each other. They're trying to kill each other. We currently have seen a huge swing to Labor in all of these seats out in the eastern suburbs that historically have been Liberal territory. At the 2018 Victorian state election, the 2022 federal election, and then again the 2022 November state election. It's not a fluke. There is a shift of sentiment towards Labor in these communities. Broadly speaking, if we want to do demographic bingo, which I hate doing, but professional women, people from migrant communities, particularly from Chinese Australian backgrounds, are voting for the Labor Party. And if there was ever a chance to win Aston, it's now. Like this is what I call an opportunity. And yeah. I would say to folks out there, get involved in this campaign, because we can win this one.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you, and you can see how that plays out really, really strongly when you think about Peter Dutton and you think about the Liberal brand, and then you compare that with Albo and Mary Doyle and who they are and what they represent, and they represent that area really well. Peter Dutton, Queensland Copper, is not actually going to go well with working women in the seat of Aston. It's not really going to go well with the new home buyers in that area. Like, there's a whole range of groups, and we've talked before about elections are won by piecing together thin slices of democratically selected groups, and I just can't see how the Liberals will do that. They're in total chaos. The hyenas are fighting for the spoils of defeat, and that's what they do. Meanwhile, you've got Albo out there laying out a redefinition of security to talk to the heartland of Australia, which you would say Aston is the typical Menzian Hawkean seat, right? Like, it is a group of people who want a government that allows them to have aspirations but won't let them fall too far. Well, here's Albo saying, we're going to invest in manufacturing, we're going to invest in early childcare, we're going to make sure that we have jobs here locally, we're going to address inflation by doing sensible things like bringing down the cost of prescriptions. Like, these are things that people in those kind of seats will look at and go, that seems about right. And what's the alternative? Peter Dutton, who, quite frankly, at this point, hasn't laid out any alternative except that he doesn't like what Labor's doing. Now, there'll be some people that appeals to, I'm sure there always is, but is it going to be enough to cobble together an electoral coalition of votes to win the seat? Time will tell, but I'm with you. I think this is really winnable, and certainly, like, I've known Mary Doyle. I'm not sure if the listeners will know this. I've known Mary Doyle for a decade or so. We worked together at the ACTU. A more genuine, community-minded person I'm not sure I've ever met. Mary was not someone who was involved in things because she wanted to be a member of Parliament. Mary. One of my first memories of Mary was that, we were at a conference together. It was a superannuation conference of all things. And Mary gets up and starts singing karaoke just to try and get people involved, and get a bit of life into the room. and that's the kind of person Mary is. She's a genuine person who'll knock on the doors and make the calls and, tell her story about raising kids. And she's raised wonderful kids, and she's done that. She's come up the hard way. There's no question about that. But she absolutely is a great candidate. So, I mean, I don't know much about the Liberal candidate. Strikes me as, from what I do know, strikes me as sort of your typical Liberal candidate. Normally, probably someone more for a safe seat than who's going to wear out the shoe leather, making it happen. I think they're in for the fight of their life with Mary Doyle. Absolutely.
It was interesting. Someone I was talking to last night was going, I don't know why we as in the government, why Labor did call the by-election date it to be that early when they could have actually extended it out longer, which would have forced the Liberals to have a rank and file pre-selection. And that's exactly what you want to do, because it would expose the weaknesses within their actual party organisation right now. The fact that they're just trying to avoid fights right now. It's like the Liberal Party right now literally is the commercial hotel in Warrigal at about 2 minutes before closing time. Like you're just looking in the 90s, right? You are just looking around and a punch up is going to start at any moment, but it can happen anywhere. It literally can happen anywhere. Could be at the bar, could be near the pool table, could be near the men's toilets, could be in the men's toilets. Like a fight is going to break out, and they could all break out simultaneously, or maybe they could all start at one point in time, in succession, then it all get into this massive pile in, right? That's the Liberal Party right now. They are drunk. They are angry. They are pissed off with each other. Some of them don't know why they're pissed off with each other, but they're just pissed off with each other, and they want a blue. And that by having the election so early, it gave them the excuse to go, oh, we don't have time to vote, so let's just do it all in house.
But maybe there's something to that too, though, right? Because they are drunk and angry, and the hyenas are still, tearing off what's left of the bones of their defeats, both in Victoria and federally. And Dutton has no vision. Like Dutton's vision of Australia is sort of like a Frankenstein's version of Howard's vision of Australia, which is not the same country anymore, right? And those fights are happening right now. So, I mean, yeah, look, I think the party installing a candidate is also going to piss off the local members, right? And in a seat like Aston, where you've just had an MP who had to basically run dead himself, like he had people on the ground doing stuff for him, but they had to do a lot of heavy lifting. And now 6 months later, he's like, yeah, thanks for all the fish, I'm off. And they're going to be called upon again to do that work for a candidate they've had no say in. I mean, frankly, if I was in the Liberal Party in Aston, I'd be going, well, what's the point? What am I turning up for? I'm going to help this person who, I don't know, I've had no say in, get into Parliament and do what? Sit there in opposition? Well, Labor, if Labor wants one more seat to their majority, so I think the stakes for the Liberal Party members are actually, in a way, it's a bit like them saying, well, we expect you to turn up and do this work for someone who we've imposed upon you, and even if they get elected, fundamentally they're not going to be able to implement the policies of the Liberal Party anyway. That's not a very motivational. It's not a very motivational pitch. Whereas you elect Mary Doyle, that gives Labor, more than a one-seat majority. So in the event that something bad did happen to one of our other MPs, touch wood, it doesn't, but we would still be able to continue to implement the agenda that we've been laying out. That's a much more motivational pitch to be able to say, let's keep government, let's secure government, than, oh, yeah, let's all vote for someone we've never heard of because someone in the state office of the Liberal Party, who, by the way, isn't talking to anybody else, has imposed on us. That'd be my view.
Let's take a quick break to talk about SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust. Lists that are up to date, absolutely. Phone banks that can change minds. Emails that drive donations, and events that will energize the community online and offline. And text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Okay, let's get back to the show. And I completely agree. And we're in a moment here where we've kind of got our foot on the necks of the Liberal Party, and the last thing we want to do is take our foot off it. And I think we just want to just push it down a little bit harder and just squeeze a little bit tighter. And the best way to do that really is to get involved in the local campaign. And here's how you can do it. You need to go to thisislabor.org/volunteer. You'll see at the top of the webpage, there'll be a link to the Aston campaign. Just click on that. There's two things you can do. You can donate money, and if you've got legs at work, or if you've got a voice and a hand at work, there's phone banks and door knocks in which you can get involved in. So sign up there, and one of the field organisers will give you a call and get involved in that campaign, give you some training, and make a difference and get Mary Doyle elected on the 1st of April. And I'll put those links up in the bio for today's episode as well. Can we talk about The Voice?
Yes.
We had Annie Jill Gallagher on the podcast earlier in the year. Really enjoyed the conversation with her. I thought that she made more sense than anyone else who's been, certainly from the political side, talking about it. And I think that's something I want to talk about. I want to talk about the things that you're worried about in terms of this campaign, but also want to talk about the things that give you hope. Can we start with the things that are challenging about this campaign at this moment in time? I know it's got a long way to go, but I just want to get your thoughts on where we're at in terms of things that might be just worrying you a little bit.
I think the thing that worries me a little bit about it is that within the political class, there hasn't been a good understanding of the difference between the rhetoric and the reality. So the rhetoric of this is an opportunity to bring our country together, to recognise the oldest continuous civilization on earth as part of our Commonwealth, and to ensure that they're consulted on issues that are going to impact them, and that will help our nation go forward in a unified way. Like, that's good rhetoric, and that's where we will get to once it's passed. The reality between now and that point is that a referendum is intrinsically divisive. It divides people into a yes camp and a no camp. It is a binary option. And what worries me a little bit is that our desire to get to that point post a yes vote, post a successful outcome, means that people get very concerned that we've got to get everyone to agree, that we're going to end up chasing our tails trying to get every single Australian to vote yes. Now, that would be ideal, right? Like, in an ideal world, every Australian would understand that this is something that they can vote yes to and do the right thing and a good thing and have a better country and literally have no personal negative impacts at all. But the other reality is that's not going to happen. Like we discussed on our podcast yesterday, there are people who recognise that the no vote is actually a target market for certain sales demographics, right? So there's people in the Murdoch organisation for whom the no campaign is actually a really great opportunity to do advertising, push subscriptions, and target marketing and harvest data. Like, there's vested interests at play here. So I do worry a little bit that we end up trying to be all things to all people and chasing down votes in places where we don't necessarily need them. We need a majority of votes in a majority of states to win the referendum. Once we win the referendum, that's when we come together. And I go back to the marriage equality campaign, and I just refer back to that because in that campaign, yes, the rhetoric was bringing people together. Yes, it was taking the nation forward in a unified way, but we didn't get distracted or run down blind alleys chasing people who fundamentally were not going to vote yes. We understood the aim was to win the campaign. You win the campaign and then you implement the change. You don't kind of try and convince people that you're implementing the change during the campaign, because that's how you lose both.
You make a number of important points there, and I want to just sort of pick up on a couple of them. And the thing that I have reflected on over the course of, the last 2 or 3 months is that referendums are not easily won things. And we haven't had one here in Australia since 1999, which was the referendum on the Republic. And it's a difficult campaign to win. And a lot of campaigns have, and I'm going more broader here in terms of referendums that have happened around the world, with similar type of electoral processes. You can see campaigns that at the beginning, when the referendum was first initiated, that the positive campaign or the campaign for change or amendment to a constitution or whatever had overwhelming support. And then what we noticed was, as the campaign goes on, the campaign, the no vote or the campaign against the change slowly claws back the support, and then when it comes to election day or voting day, they win. It doesn't get up. Examples of that, like the Scottish independence referendum. Initially it was, and that was a simple majority vote. That wasn't even, the constructions that we have here in Australia. It was people were overwhelmingly in support of independence for Scotland, and in the end, it didn't get up. New Zealand had a cannabis referendum at their last national elections, and overwhelmingly at the start, everyone was like, "Yeah, this is a good thing," and complacency crept in. No one ran a proper coordinated yes vote, and it didn't get up. And so there's enough there to sort of suggest to us, and even Brexit, you can probably, there's a complexity to Brexit as well, but there's been examples where overwhelmingly people thought, yeah, this is a good idea. I like this idea. But then slowly but surely, this negativity, this no camp creeps in, creates confusion and hesitancy and fear and complexity. And then all of a sudden people start to think about it a lot more. And going to the point that you're making, the campaigns that are successful, that seek change, make a values-based proposition to the electorate. The marriage equality campaign was a values-based proposition. It was, do you just broadly believe in equality? And I think most Australians go, yeah, I do. Yeah, that's a core value that I subscribe to, and so therefore I will vote yes. And it's the same here in this campaign. Do you broadly believe in racial equality? Yeah, I do. And if I don't, I'm a shit bloke. And so the vote really comes down to, do you want to be a good bloke or do you want to be a shit bloke? Well, I don't want to be a shit bloke. Well, then you should vote yes. And that's it. And let's not talk about this process crap that the Tories are throwing up right now. And we'll get to that in a moment. I want to get your thoughts on how do we overcome that? How do we get the debate out of that and back to a simple question of shit bloke, good bloke, What are your thoughts on that? And by asking you that, where do you see the hope in this campaign? Where is the hope in this campaign?
Yeah, look, I think the hope in this campaign is that increasingly people who are involved with the campaigns that are out there are starting to go back and look at what worked and what didn't, either in referendums or plebiscites, and understand that is actually the framework, right? That if you can't convince people that this is a values decision and it aligns with their values, you're not going to convince them by giving them more detail. That's, and increasingly people are starting to tell the stories. So, again, just reflecting on my involvement in the Yes campaign, my mum, I have multiple mums, right? So, and my mum had never been politically active before. and I was asked to come and participate in something. And I said to Mum, "Hey, do you want to come and do this? You don't have to participate if you don't want to, but you can just come and watch. We're going to paint a mural, right?" And fundamentally, Mum got actively involved because she saw an opportunity to tell her story about what it meant for her. And the hope that I see now in the Yes campaign for the Voice is that we're starting to see some of those stories come through. Those stories about what has changed over the course of Australian recent history and what this next step will mean for people. Because when you're saying to people, we want you to make a values choice, if you don't give them somebody for whom it makes a difference, then the argument that change could be scary or change could do this or change might have an impact on you becomes really easy to believe, right? Like if the marriage equality plebiscite had been all about the technical implications for the Marriage Act rather than what it meant for my mums and their acceptance in their community, then when Mum was door knocking and somebody goes, "Oh, I'm a staunch Catholic," the next line wouldn't have been, "Oh, and me and everyone in my church is voting yes because we know it's going to help people like you." It would have been, "Well, the Marriage Act does define marriages between a man and a woman." Now, that's fine, and that can be someone's position. But if you want to have a values-based conversation, you've got to have stories that reflect those values and what the next step means when those values take place. As I say, my mum is not a politically active person, but her tears about her experiences raising a son in the 80s in an environment where being a lesbian was really difficult and dangerous, did inspire people, and people reached out, and people said, actually, this has changed how I think about this. There are real people's lives that this will impact. And frankly, whether it's yes or no makes no immediate impact on my life personally. But now I'm thinking about friends of my kid or my aunt or these people who it will help. And that's the hope, right? That's got to be the hope of the campaign, that this next step will help people who have been on a journey already. Like, Linda Burney and Patrick Dodson were not recognised as human beings when they were born in this country. Like, and now, one of them is a minister and one of them is the father of reconciliation, and it's such a change just in their lifetime. Well, this is the next step, and absolutely we should support them being able to achieve that, because the alternative is to be a shit bloke and go, actually, you know what? Nah, I don't think racial equality is a good thing. I'm not for it. Like, I don't like Jacinta Price's politics, but I fundamentally believe in her right to be a human being and to be treated equally, and that we should respect the fact that she comes from the world's oldest continuous civilization. And within that, there are different needs and different requirement given the history of our country. We can't just wash away that this Commonwealth that we so enjoy was founded on a series of false premises, like not ascribing motivations one way or another to the people who did the things that they did. But we have to acknowledge that those things happened, and that part of that acknowledgement is to say the First Nations people need to be recognised in the birth certificate of this country, or this country will be forever without all of the elements recognised that actually make it a commonwealth for all.
It's a moment in our history in which we want to be able to look back and not have regret on the decisions that we make in this referendum.
Look, you've summed up in one sentence what I just waffled about for 10 minutes.
No, I loved it. I just, and as I'm listening to you, I'm just going, public narrative as a leadership practice, as an organising tool, or more than a tool to practice, is so important in this campaign. The story of self, whether it be your Aboriginal Australian or non-Aboriginal Australian, the story of us that unites all of us in moments of the past and that shows us what we can do in the future, and then the story of now. What is the value proposition that we need to embrace, the moral resources that we have, and how do we organise them with intentionality to create change? And therefore, what is the ask I'm putting on you right now? The ask ultimately is I need you to vote yes, but the ask immediately is I need you to get involved in this campaign. And that's so important in this campaign because it just overcomes the instructional, they talk about action inhibitors and action motivators when we train folks on public narrative. You are more likely to move someone with through narrative or story or teaching than you are through statistics. And right now, what we're losing in this, if we are losing this campaign, I'm not suggesting we are losing this campaign, but what we're seeing from the Conservatives is they're trying to fuck us up with stats, and the way you overcome that is with narrative, with stories. I think 70% of instruction from parents is through narrative to their kids. And that's what we need to lean into. It's one of our greatest resources, one of our greatest strengths in this campaign. Do we have time? Let's talk about New South Wales. They got an election on the 25th of March. It's not far away. It's around about 30 days. I was up in Sydney earlier in the week doing training with Unions New South Wales and their Essential Workers Deserve Better campaign. We want to get your thoughts about that race up in New South Wales. Labor it seems it's close in the polls. It's a different conundrum in New South Wales in terms of the way you vote, because it's optional proportional representation. That is, you don't have to complete your entire ballot paper, so votes can be exhausted. So it just creates a sort of a complexity in terms of trying to see Labor get up. The other thing to throw in there is that there's a number of seats that you think will fall to Labor on election night, but then sort of to get to the 11 that they need, or the 9 that they need, I think it is, the margins from 6 to 12 are big, fat margins that the Tories hold right now. Not insurmountable, but something else just to factor in. How are you feeling about the New South Wales campaign? And you've had some involvement as well with the Essential Workers campaign. Just want to get your sense about the New South Wales election.
Sure. Look, we spoke to Chris Minns just before Christmas on the Week on Wednesday. Chris joins yourself, Stephen, as one of the very few people we've had on as an interview guest, and there's no question it's going to be a tight election race. The Liberals up there are just as much of a mess as they are in Victoria, quite frankly. And I think it's starting to all come out about Dominic Perrottet's brother and this, that, and the other thing. But fundamentally, too, I was really glad to see the focus of Unions New South Wales, the Teachers Federation, the Nurses and Midwives, the Health Services Union, and others as well, really being on the core bread and butter issues that are Labor values issues: cost of living, service delivery. There was a point, start of the year, where there was a lot of talk about, starting maybe in last year, about poker machine reform and gambling reform. And not that gambling reform is not an important issue. I accept that it is. But when you then look at people's rankings of what's most important, what they are going to decide their vote on, pokie reform is down the bottom for the vast majority of people. When we're talking about Western Sydney, when we're talking about regional seats and regional centres that Labor needs to win votes in, it's not going to change the government, right? So I was a little bit concerned that people were going to get a bit distracted by that. These are issues that Labor governments can deal with when they're in government, but fundamentally, I think Tasmania showed us an election or two ago that if you make that the core of your election, you're just not talking about what people care about. So the fact that 60% of essential workers in New South Wales are thinking about quitting, that is an issue. That's going to impact people, not just the people who quit their job, but that that means if I do get sick, am I going to be able to see a nurse? Am I going to be able to see a doctor? Is the emergency room even going to be open? Is the ambulance going to be able to come and get me? Are the teachers, is my kid going to get the same teacher for the whole year or for the whole term? I mean, these are issues that people really do care about. And the cost of living stuff around tolls is obviously a big one too in New South Wales, even more so than in any other state. I think that's fundamentally a vote winner for Labor when they're doing things about that. So, yeah, look, I think there's a really good chance it's going to be very tight. Those big margins, I think we have seen in the last few state elections around the country some big swings in some places. Whether New South Wales follows that trend, that's going to be the question. But yeah, Dominic Perrottet, I mean, the accidental boy prince of New South Wales is just out of his depth, right? Like he's running around. He's talking about Western Sydney like it's a foreign country, even when he's standing in it. You know, his response to the floods in the northern parts of the state was just ham-fisted at best. And now, you know, his brother's on the run or something. I mean, for God's sake, get it together, man.
I did see that news report. That was hysterical. Channel 9 ran it. It's worth actually going onto Twitter and finding the clip, the package. I think it was John Graham, it's Labor opposition, got a couple of great grabs, which was like, we're putting an APB out or whatever the police say, a missing persons report on where Dominic Perrottet's brother is. Can you please want to talk to you? They've got questions for you. It was gold. It was absolute comedy, and I loved it. I can't believe they got that up.
But, you know, this is the thing. Then Dominic Perrottet refuses to answer questions about it and says, I'm not going to talk about my family. Well, that's fine, Tom. No one's asking you about your wife and your very many children. We're asking you about the fact that your brother is wanted by the police. And you have the police minister and the capacity to hire and fire the police minister. In most people's minds, that's worth some commentary, mate. Like, step up to the plate and lead or step away. Like, he's obviously not going to do that, but it's I mean, the whole Liberal machine up there is a mess too, you know. So Labor has to be disciplined. It comes back to that thing we've talked about, right? Like, they've got to have the right narrative. They've got to continue to pursue it and not get distracted. As much fun as you and I can have with the Dom Perrottet stuff, at the end of the day, that will reinforce a narrative about how chaotic and unable to deliver the Liberals are, but by itself is probably not going to be what changes government.
Social Democratic will be focusing on the New South Wales election campaign starting not next week. Next week we've got our traditional International Women's Day podcast handover episode, but the week after that, all the way up until election day on the 25th of March, we're going to be focusing wholly and solely on the New South Wales election campaign. And I think we'll also be we'll do a bonus episode at some point during that with Mark Morey, who's the union's New South Wales secretary, and talking a bit about the campaign that they're doing around essential workers. Let's end on a high note. Monday was a day of celebration and a day of mourning for some. It chalked up 3,000 days for the Labor government under the premiership of Daniel Andrews. That means that he qualifies for a statue. For those outside of the state of Victoria, the backstory of this stupid story really is that when Jeff Kennett was Premier of Victoria in around about 1998, heading into 1999, he decided to commission a series of statues to premiers of the state that had been a premier for more than 3,000 days. Those that qualified for it were Dunstan, Balti, Hamer, and Kane. So 3 Liberal premiers and 1 Labor premier. But this wasn't some sort of altruistic, lovely recognition of past leadership. He had done the math himself and realised that he wasn't that far away from 3,000 either, thus qualifying for a statue. All he had to do was beat or win the next state election that was coming up in in 1999. At the time, the Labor Party was seen to be in a bit of turmoil. John Brumby was the leader. His leadership was struggling in the polls. He then got rolled, and a guy called Steve Bracks was elected the leader of the Labor Party. And Kennett, was like, Steve who? And this is a lay down misère. I'm going to, lock this one in, and I'm going to get my statue 3,000 days. Come on, And then he didn't win. He didn't win, and he never got his statue. And now Daniel Andrews is qualified for the statue, 3,000 days as leader. And this story is just in the heads of the Tories. They are obsessed with this. And I just want to get your thoughts on this one, Ben.
Well, it speaks to the different sets of values, doesn't it? Like, Jeff Kennett desperately wanted his statue. He was bitterly disappointed about it. I think he was bringing up the fact that Andrews would get a statue during the last election campaign as a reason to not vote for Labor, as though the only reason you would be in government is to get the baubles and the trinkets. And yet, Andrews has been asked about it, and he's like, it's a day like any other. I'm not concerning myself with statues. That's really a matter for the next premier to figure out. I've got an agenda of things I want to get done, and they don't include building a statue. I think the reality for the Tories is that they still believe they have an entitlement to rule, and part of that entitlement to rule is marking these kind of abstract anniversaries with these baubles and trinkets and statues. When I think about the kinds of things that Labor movement people need to do to get statues, I think about people like Zelda DePrano, who Victorian Trades Hall is building a statue of. There's a person who chained themselves to the offices of the Commonwealth in order to get women equal pay. They didn't sit on the plump chairs of Treasury Place with their staff and refuse to answer questions. I mean, Kennett is just the real poster boy for that set of values. And at the same time, Andrews is increasingly, I'm sure he wouldn't like me calling him this, but the poster boy for our set of values, right? That it is what you do that matters, not the recognition that you've done it that's important. And I sincerely hope he does at least another 3,000 days, and he gets 2 statues, and they can high five each other over the delivery of free kinder and better public schools and better hospitals and, shorter commute times from the outer suburbs and more infrastructure locally so there are jobs in the regions. Like, that's the sort of thing that we should be focused on. But, geez, and even the media class, oh, my God, is Dan Andrews going to have a statue? Will the statue wear a North Face jacket, or will it be in a suit? Like, if that's the level of your political commentary, you should not be allowed to call yourself chief political editor. You should be down in the gossip pages. Like, there's a place for that. It's the gossip columns. It's not the political pages of a major newspaper. So, look, I think it's hilarious in a way, but it does show that clear divide between what are, the Tories' values, the Liberal Party values, and Labor values.
And it just, to that point, it just highlights, this is why we win, and this is why you keep losing. You got your eyes are on the wrong ball. You are in another place. You are not focused on the things that matter to ordinary. I hate that word, ordinary. The things that matter to Victorians. You're just you're on another planet. And the journalists, to your point there, like, why? You know the Premier. You know exactly how he handles questions. You've watched him for the last friggin' 12 years. Why ask him those questions? It's just these are just ones he easily bats away. Like, it just sets him up to then get back to talking points. Like he always says, the only thing I want to build is removing more level crossings, building more hospitals, building more schools, building more bloody underground tunnels to connect us all.
Well, imagine
it's odd.
being in the federal seat of Aston, and the main thing that you're hearing about the Liberal Party in Victoria talking about is whether or not Dan Andrews is going to have a statue. And you compare that to the fact that Dan Andrews is talking about those actual issues around level crossing removal, which in Aston is going to be a big deal, right? And hospitals, which in Aston is going to be a big deal. Schools, which in Aston is going to be a big deal. And you'd be, just in terms of brand, you'd be going, what are the Liberals talking about? Statues? You know, I mean, how many people in Aston have even been to Treasury Gardens? You know, like these are not issues that really resonate with people. So, I mean, I hope they keep talking about it. I hope that that the Victorian Liberal Party maintain their obsession with Dan Andrews, and I hope the media commentators who seem to enjoy hanging off those little tidbits, insider tidbits that they get given, keep putting up those soft balls, because he just whacks them out of the park. Like, good, long may it continue. Like I said, they keep doing it. He's going to get 3,000 more days, and there'll be a terracotta army of Dan Andrewses in Treasury Place. The way this is going, they just can't get it together.
It's remarkable how the media and the Tory men are so obsessed with an erection. But there you go.
You say things on this podcast we would never get away with on the week on.
I just keep searching for something that can then become the subject heading for the actual episode. I don't know if Rebecca's prepared to do that one. Before we go, do you want to give the shows coming up another plug? The ones at the Fringe in Adelaide.
Yeah, that'd be great. So Van Badham and I are in Adelaide on the 1st, the 8th and the 15th of March. We are in the Yurt, which is behind the Immigration Museum. Lovely building. When you come along, because I'm sure you will, you'll notice the bricks that have the names of families and the countries that they've come from when they came to South Australia, which is a lovely tribute to many of the migrant families from across the generations and across the eras. So check that out. We're in the Yurt. It is air conditioned. Hopefully it won't be as hot as it was this week. And yeah, come and check us out. We will post the episodes, of course, as well, but it's a great atmosphere, and Van signs copies of her books afterwards. So if you want to bring those along, you can, and we hang around and have a chat and have a drink, and it's a really good, fun atmosphere. If you've never been to a Fringe festival, now's the time.
Ben, is it ticketed, or how do you get tickets, or can you just walk up? Or
yeah, so you can rock up on the day, but you can get your tickets online. So if you go to the Adelaide Fringe Festival page, or you can just Google Adelaide Fringe Van Badham or Adelaide Fringe Week on Wednesday, and it comes up as a first link that you can click through and select the ticket that's right for you. We have tiered pricing, of course, as well. So if you don't have a lot of money, we want to make sure people can participate. It's Week on Wednesday has never been about the money. It has never been about the money. But yeah, if you want to get a ticket in advance, that helps us too, just so we know how many chairs to put out. So always good.
Wonderful. As a former resident of Adelaide for a number of years, the Adelaide Fringe is a really good event to go to, and the fact that you guys got a show on, then that's even more reason to get down there to support the Fringe and support Week on Wednesday. So we want to wish you the best of luck with those live shows, and obviously with the podcast in general. Thanks for your time today, Ben, and we hope to have you on the show again.
I think it's be our turn to have you next, Stephen. You'll have to come on the Week on Wednesday. We will find a time.
Podcast table tennis. I'm all about it.
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me on, mate. Been great.
Cheers. Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Morris Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, morrisblackburn.com.au. Morris Blackburn, experience you can count on. Socially Democratic was brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energize the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. To find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign.